you could see his skull and in places his brain. So not ideal at all. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please do subscribe. And if you're old here, hello again. My name is Philpott. This is Sandy, she's back from her hiatus. And I do true crime videos on my channel and the occasional story time. So we're back to true crime this week. This is a requested video, so thank you to Katie Rose for sending this in. This is the case of Bonnie and Clyde. So the story takes place during the Great Depression, which obviously was a time where there was a lot of poverty and as a result, a lot of crime. Actually, having looked into this case, it was different to what I thought it was. So I was kind of confused because everyone kind of talks about Bonnie and Clyde, but in actual fact, it was really their gang that was doing it all. Like, it wasn't just them. There was a whole group of them. But I suppose the reason they were so sensationalized was the fact that Bonnie was a woman, and that was unheard of for a woman to be doing these kind of things. And that totally shocked the people of the US, which really makes me wonder if before that time, were women just never criminals, or were they just really good at hiding it? Interesting thought. I would love to know the answer to that question. Okay, so a little bit of background on Bonnie. So Bonnie was born in Rowena, Texas in 1910, and she was a middle child, and her father actually died when she was only 4 years old. But because of this, her mother, Emma Parker, moved their family back to her parents' home in Cement City. And this was one of the worst slums in Dallas, Texas. So not only were they poor, but they were like poor. Like, they were one of the poorest of the poor. And all her life, Bonnie dreamed about being famous. She really wanted to be an actress, and she was thinking maybe even that she would become a famous poet. But whatever the means were, the main thing was that she wanted to be famous. And I mean, here we are talking about her 100 years later. So in her second year of high school, Bonnie met a guy called Roy Thornton. And things obviously moved pretty fast for them because they both dropped out of school and got married 6 days before Bonnie's 16th birthday. Which right now sounds absolutely absurd, getting married at 16, but I mean, people didn't live as long back then, and maybe it was more of a done thing. I think it was definitely more of a done thing than it would be today, but still think it was quite young. And their marriage was not the best because Roy would be gone a lot of the time, he'd have run-ins with the police, and it was also thought that at times he was physically abusive. So it ended pretty quickly. And strangely enough, they never actually divorced, but after 1929, they did not meet again. Their paths never crossed again, and that was that. But Bonnie actually was still wearing her wedding ring when she died. So that's pretty interesting to me because that's a conscious decision you're making to consistently wear your wedding ring, even if you're with some other guy and he's no longer in your life, you know? Anyway. But after the two separated, Bonnie moved back in with her mother and she got a job as a waitress. So in early 1929, when Bonnie was 18, she briefly kept a diary which was eventually found, and she wrote stories of her loneliness, her life in Dallas, and her love of taking photos. It's also thought that she dabbled in a little bit of sex work around the time because she seemed to own a lot of things that someone on a waitress's salary, especially in that time, was not gonna own, like these fancy fur coats and just, you know, nice things. But you know, get that money, honey. So moving on to Clyde. His full name was Clyde Chestnut Barrow. And I can't say that without laughing, but it's such a like cute name for such a bad boy, you know? Anyway, he was born in 1909 in Ellis County, Texas. He was the fifth of 7 children, and his family was really poor as well. They moved to Dallas in the 1920s and they lived underneath their wagon while they were saving up to buy a tent. They had 7 kids. We are so privileged in this day and age, like I can't even wrap my head around that. In 1926, at the age of 17, Clyde was arrested for the first time. He was arrested because he ran from the police when they confronted him about the rental car that he failed to return on time. And he had taken it to go see some girl as well. So it's just kind of funny to me because technically that's the kind of thing that any normal law-abiding good person would get arrested for. You know, like, it's not cold-blooded murder, it's just such a simple thing, like, and could easily be a simple mistake. And the second time he got arrested was with his brother Buck Barrow, and they got arrested for possession of stolen turkeys. Clyde, you bad man. And Clyde did have some legit jobs between 1927 and 1929, but even in that time he was still cracking safes, stealing cars, the likes, you know, as you do. So let's get to the time when Bonnie and Clyde met for the first time. So at the ages of 19 and 20 respectively, Bonnie and Clyde met at a mutual friend's house where Bonnie was just making hot chocolate in the kitchen, Clyde walked in, they locked eyes, and that was that. This was in January 1930, and there was pretty much an instant connection there. They fell in love almost immediately. So after that point, they spent so much time together in the weeks following that. However, their whirlwind romance was put to a halt pretty quickly because Clyde was arrested again, and he was convicted of auto theft. So following this, Clyde was sent to Eastham Prison Farm at the age of 21, and this would be a pivotal point in his life. So Bonnie was like, nah, I don't want him in prison. So during one of their visits, she snuck him in a gun somehow. Well, it was some kind of weapon, but I have seen a couple of sources say that it was a gun. But anyway, soon after Bonnie snuck him this gun, he did manage to escape. But he was recaptured and they brought him back in. Now, I will just say, you might think prison in our day and age is bad, and I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to go there, but in Bonnie and Clyde's day and age, it was a whole other story. And this prison in particular was one of the worst in the US. So some of the reasons it was so bad was you'd have to do hard labor in the fields, the guards really didn't care if someone was abusing you or attacking you or assaulting you in any way, and you literally had no protection from the authority figures there. Now that sounds like absolute hell. I don't know about you, but the last place I want to be with criminals is a place where even the authority figures don't care what they do to you. And that was basically the situation Clyde was in. So as a result of this, Clyde was repeatedly sexually assaulted while he was there by one particular inmate in the prison. And eventually he just said, nope, not having this anymore. So he lured this guy into the showers one night, gave him the impression that they were gonna, you know, have a little rumpy pumpy, and he retaliated to the abuse by attacking and killing this guy with a lead pipe, crushing his skull. Whoa. But this was the first time he ever killed someone, and he got a really lucky escape as well. There was an inmate in the prison at the time who was serving a life sentence, he was not getting out, and he also hated Clyde's abuser. Because of this, he just said, you know what? I'll take the blame for it. So he took responsibility for Clyde's first ever murder. Oh my god. And at this point, okay, what was the other really difficult part of being in this prison? The hard labor. So in order to avoid this, Clyde purposely chopped off 2 of his toes so he wouldn't have to do it. And because of this, he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. But little did he know that his mother was actually out petitioning for his release. And she was successful, and only 6 days after he chopped his toes off, he got out. You can't write this stuff. It's really unfortunate. The poor guy, like, he chopped off his big toe as well, which is like the one you need the most for balance. And it was just a big mistake. He only missed out on 6 days of hard labor. And then he was free. But his sister said that something awful must have happened to him while he was in there, because he was a totally different person when he came out. And obviously we know now that what happened to him in there was sexual assault, repeated sexual assault. So after he got out then, Clyde robbed multiple grocery stores and gas stations, and he did this in a lot less time than it would have taken him before he was in prison. He got really ballsy and had a lot of confidence in oh my god. His favorite weapon at the time was the M198 Browning automatic rifle, which I'll tell you now means absolutely nothing to me. I know F all about guns, but this is a picture of what it was. I mean, it's a big ass gun. And after he was in prison, Clyde's goal in life became revenge against the Texas prison system because he had totally suffered. He was traumatized after that experience. So the plan was to collect enough money and firearms to raid the prison and basically set loads of the inmates free. So they pretty much set up a small gang to carry out these robberies, and at one point Bonnie was put in jail for one of these robberies, but a grand jury failed to indict her, so she was set free. Now on the 30th of April 1932, there was a robbery that took place that I want to say escalated. So Clyde was the driver of the getaway car, and whatever happened in the struggle with the store owner ended up getting shot and killed. And then a witness came forward to say that they believed Clyde was one of the shooters in this whole kerfuffle, when he actually wasn't. Like, he did not get out of the car the whole time. So now, because of a misunderstanding, Clyde was wanted for murder, and he was facing the electric chair. So that's pretty scary in itself. So because of this, Bonnie and Clyde went on the run. And what you'd expect from two people at this point would be to be, you know, well-behaved civilians, but that was definitely not the case at all. They had other plans. So on the 5th of August, Clyde went to this country dance event with a couple of the gang members, and he was drinking there. And drinking was actually illegal at the time, but this sheriff and deputy came up to them and basically said, look guys, you can't drink, and Clyde was not happy with this. I mean, nor would I be. But I wouldn't have done what he did next. They opened fire at the police and killed one of them. Then they escaped, and weirdly enough, around this time, the police had to stay in their own jurisdiction, so they could not pass the state borders. So Bonnie and Clyde, or the Barrow Gang they were known as, basically just stayed around state lines so that they could cross over and they wouldn't be able to be chased. The whole thing doesn't make any sense to me, but you know, it is what it is. And there were one or two other murders along the way as well, including a time where Bonnie, Clyde, and one other gang member stumbled upon a police trap somehow that was actually meant for another criminal. And to defend themselves, they killed the guy that was there. But the thing was, and not that I'm trying to justify their actions at all, but they weren't like cold-blooded serial killers or anything. They killed a good few people, but it wasn't from the desire to kill. It was simply because if they didn't kill them, they would have gone to prison. It was to defend themselves. They definitely weren't angels, but they also weren't like your Jeffrey Dahmers and your Ted Bundys. So moving forward to March 1933, Clyde's older brother Buck was released from prison. Obviously he had had his own life of crime too. So Buck and his wife Blanche met up with Bonnie and Clyde, and they kind of teamed together and started this housekeeping business. Not exactly the type of people I would want to leave potentially unsupervised in my home. And initially, Buck and Blanche were trying to get Clyde to turn himself in because, I mean, they were looking for him for murder. And Blanche was particularly worried because she believed that Clyde's disregard of the law was gonna rub off on Buck. And she certainly had reason to worry, let me tell you that. Because the two guys would end up joining together, and they kind of even had their own little life of crime together. They were partying loads. Obviously alcohol was illegal, so that was one thing. And they were just rebelling against any rules they could, really. But one day then, in an apartment in Joplin, Missouri, Clyde, he messed up big time. He was cleaning a gun and he accidentally fired it. So obviously this alerted the neighbors, and the neighbors alerted the police. And as expected, when the police approached the house, Clyde and Buck opened fire at them and killed two of them. Bonnie ended up shooting a guy as well. And then they all escaped together. So they traveled around the US and they got their money from robbing banks. So they upgraded from grocery stores to banks. And then they even started to kidnap people, which is a little unusual because I'm not exactly sure why they wanted to kidnap them. Like, they weren't getting money out of them. In fact, they even gave money to some of them to like help them get home from wherever they were. Unless they were trying to get information or like codes to safes or something. I really don't know. Just seems a bit random to me. Or maybe it was just the thrill of getting away with it, who knows. But at this point, they really had gained a lot of media attention, and when you're borderline famous, it's hard to get away from the police. This basically made their daily life so much more difficult and more awkward. Okay, before I move on, I want to do a little experiment with you, because from here on out, the case really speeds up. So if you're still here, comment down below, True Crime Junkie. I'm going to give you a second to do that. I have it on the screen. Okay, I just want to see who like the real MVPs are. Like, who's actually watching this? Okay, time to get into the... So in June of 1933, Clyde, Bonnie, and one other gang member were driving along, and Clyde didn't see the warning signs for a bridge under construction in Texas. So as a result, they had an accident and the car flipped and went into a ravine. And whether there was a gasoline fire or something else happened with the car or something, Bonnie suffered some severe burns. She sustained 3rd-degree burns to her right leg, and it basically was like the whole of her right leg. She was supposedly burned so bad that they didn't even think she was gonna survive. And they could even see her bone in some places. If I was Bonnie at that point, I'd be like, right, you guys just go on without me, I'm good. The following month then, in July of 1933, the gang checked into a place in Missouri, and they had another shootout with the police. And at this point, Buck got really badly injured. He sustained a bullet wound to the forehead. You could see his skull and in places his brain. So not ideal at all. His wife Blanche ended up with glass shards in her eyes. Again, ouch. And this left her blinded. Again, not ideal when you're running from the police. It definitely made it easier for the police to find them, because they were leaving behind drops of blood and, you know, dirty bandages and stuff like this. There was another kerfuffle in which the police and just regular citizens opened fire at the gang, and like the police literally told the public, go for it. Just like, go for it. Actually, this case was really, like, there were so many run-ins with the police and like shootouts and stuff that I'm kind of confused about which ones were which. And I'm not sure if this is the same one as the one where Buck got his shot to the forehead, or if it's a different one, but either way, during one of the shootouts, Buck got badly injured again, and he managed to pull through for a little bit, but while he was in hospital in Iowa awaiting surgery, he actually got pneumonia and was too weak to fight it, so he did pass away. In the weeks following this, the gang did a lot more moving around. They went to Colorado, Minnesota, and then they went back to Texas to visit their families. They also went to Mississippi in there too. But late November 1933, a grand jury gave out a murder indictment for the gang for a murder against a police officer that January. So a warrant was put out for all their arrests. But I mean, they were still pretty hard to find. And in January 1934 then, they did actually help some people out of the Eastham prison farm where Clyde had originally been in prison. This was called the Eastham Breakout, and it was quite a big deal. Like, inmates shot one of the majors, and like a couple of them got out, and things just got real from here on out regarding finding the Barrow gang. On the 1st of April, 4 months later, they still hadn't been found. One of the gang members killed 2 more men, and this basically sparked more fury and I guess excitement to catch them. So $1,000 reward was offered for the return of the bodies of Bonnie and Clyde. Not necessarily alive, but yeah, they were wanted dead or alive. And after following them for a while, the police finally figured out a bit of a pattern of how they traveled. So like I said, they would travel along state lines so that they could easily cross over the state lines and not be followed. And the authorities basically figured this out, so they could figure out a way to work around it. And whatever way they managed to find where Bonnie and Clyde and the rest of the gang were, they figured out where one of the gang members' parents lived. So it was a house in Louisiana, and it was a group of 4 people that decided to stake out this house. So they were hiding in bushes and stuff, and they ended up waiting there for over 24 hours. Now, as I'm saying that, yes, 24 hours is a long time to be waiting in a particular place, but I feel like that's no time at all considering the gang was like all around the US. Did they have some kind of tip? Like, did they know that they were gonna be there at some point? Anyway, doesn't really matter. So on 9:15 a.m. on the 23rd of May, they heard Clyde's car. It was a Ford V8, so it was one of the fastest cars at the time. I mean, they could tell that was Clyde on his way. So they staged this whole scene of the father of the household, you know, being out by the car or something so that Clyde would stop and talk to him. And Clyde took the bait. And this is when they opened fire at Bonnie and Clyde. Which, by the way, makes me really nervous for the father because obviously he agreed to do this. And he would have been quite close to them if he was talking to them. So I'm like, whoa, did he sign up for potentially getting shot in the crossfire? So they shot 130 rounds at them and Clyde was killed instantly and Bonnie was very badly injured but died shortly after. And they emptied all their weapons on them to make totally sure that they were definitely dead. So Bonnie and Clyde were both shot between 25 and 50 times each. So when word got out that Bonnie and Clyde were dead, it was like, rejoice. But there was this whole fascination about their bodies and people would just show up to the scene and try and take memorabilia, and one guy even tried to cut Clyde's ear off. Can you imagine doing that? Like, this person believed that they had the right to go and cut his ear off. And I don't exactly know why, but my guess is it was some kind of either revenge for all the crime Clyde had carried out or the lives he had taken, or, I mean, it was still the Great Depression. Nobody had any money. If he had Clyde Chestnut Barrow's ear and sold it, like, he could probably feed his family for a whole year. Do you know what I mean? Like, I really don't know what his motive was, but it's still just a wild fact. So on the 26th of May, this was the day of Bonnie's funeral, and there were 20,000 people at it. And so many people sent flowers and stuff, which is just wild to me. People were actually grieving the death of this criminal. Even the Dallas City newspaper sent a big bouquet of flowers because Bonnie was the reason that they had managed to sell over 500,000 copies just in Dallas alone. And thousands of people stood outside the funeral homes of both Bonnie and Clyde in the hope that they might catch a glimpse of their body or something. Yeah. Okay, well, I guess my hand is stuck, so in February of 1935, the police arrested about 20 different family members that had covered up or done something to help Bonnie and Clyde, or at least the gang members. All of them either pleaded guilty or were found guilty, and they each served a sentence of between 1 hour in jail and 30 days in jail. Blanche Barrow was arrested and charged with assault with the intent to kill, and she was convicted and sentenced to 10 years, but in 1939 she did get out for good behaviour. And I mean, she basically lived happily ever after, leaving the life of crime behind her. And if you'll remember, Roy Thornton, Bonnie's once husband, he said, "I'm glad they went out like they did. It's much better than being caught." And also, if you remember when Bonnie worked as a waitress in Dallas, ironically, one of her regular customers ended up being part of the group that would eventually kill Bonnie and Clyde. I don't know, it's just kind of interesting how they went their separate ways. They obviously lived very different lives, and then one of them ended the life of the other one. I don't know. It's just kind of cool. With respect. And that brings me to the end of this case. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy it, please give me a like and comment down below. Comment what your thoughts are on this case. It actually really helps me out if you do that, so you know. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell beside the subscribe button so you never miss an upload. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!